Is the air that you take when you walk in this world, a sound that you make when you take it for the giving, claim ownership of everything. You're taking my time and you're wasting it. You're taking my time and you're wasting it. You're taking my time, taking my time and you're wasting it. You're taking my time. Is a test of what you're made of every time you wake up. Every time you make your best laid plans, I count away you're broken. Every time you're spoken to this way, it's a joke to give her every second of pain. I count of what you're choosing. You're finding you're losing. A crime crossing your line again and again and again. Hush now, wait for it. Hush now, the catastrophe of rushing. You're too late for it. Hush now. You test of what you're made of every time you wake up. Every breath you take is calculated. Every word you say, every bed you lay, every lie is carefully played. It's a joke for every second of pain. It's a shadow on your name. Count away you're jaded. You're crying or elated. You're so complicated. You're so complicated. You're so complicated. Hush now, wait for it. Hush now, the catastrophe of rushing. You're too late for it. Hush now. On account of where you're broken. 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 Hush now, wait for it. Hush now, the catastrophe of rushing. You're too late for it. Hush now. The catastrophe. Hush now, wait for it. Hush now, the catastrophe of rushing. You're too late for it. Hush now. Hush now. The catastrophe. Hush now. The catastrophe. The words stick even still, and I'm afraid they always will. The words stick even still, sour tar beneath my nails. In the cracks, I thought I got you all out. Your gravity coming down, a quiet prison even now. I thought I got you all out. And even with new skin and a different life, you get under, you get in. And every bullet, a dodge in the blink of your eye. 20 slivers in my skin. Even now you made it in. Even now you made it in. A 1,000 miles from me now, from your piercing glances. Even still, I I can feel your eyes somehow, and every word was paper thin. Every hill into a mountain. I thought I got you all out, and even with new skin and a different life, you get under, you get in. And every bullet that came with an edge of life, was it the flame you tried to kill? Your words haunt me even still, and I'm afraid they always will. I'm afraid they always will. The words stick even still, and I'm afraid they always will. The words stick even still, and I'm afraid they always will. Watching your tornado spin a mouth that I love you, it keeps me close to. And the flame goes high in the chocolate sky. Bridge on fire, bridge on fire. The water's edge with the things you said. I know it's sad, but I'm so glad you can't cross over. Under mazes of faded, burnout traces of a true blue you. And you were sharpening your knife under the table all this time, waiting for me to stand in line of your fire. And the flame grows high in the chocolate sky. Bridge on fire, bridge on fire. At the water's edge, you said, I know it's sad, but I'm so glad you can't cross over. See, train, you're ringing your bell. In vain, my heart, it is sore pounding, sore pounding. And you were sharpening your knife under the table all this time, waiting for me to stand in line of your fire. And the flame goes high in the chocolate sky. Bridge on fire, bridge on fire. The water's edge with the things you said. I know it's sad, but I'm so glad you can't cross over. I know it's sad. your oxygen just for a moment. I wanna feel that death-defying, life-defining need. I wanna be your oxygen just for a moment. I wanna feel desire you cut through for me. I want my heart to be your love. I can't breathe without your love. I can't hold my breath that long. I can't live without oxygen. I wanna be your oxygen just for a moment. I wanna feel the savoring, the favoring of me. I wanna feel your lips on mine, just like the first time. I wanna feel the heat in your heart for me. I want my heart to be your love. I can't breathe without your love. I can't hold my breath that long. I can't live without oxygen. Oxygen. I wanna be your oxygen just for a moment. I wanna feel that death-defying, life-defining need. I wanna be your oxygen just for a moment. You are the oxygen you need. I want my heart to be your love. I can't breathe without your love. I can't hold my breath that long. I can't live without. I can't live without oxygen. Oxygen. Oh.
Everyone, welcome to OMSI's Virtual Science Pub. Woohoo! My name is Rebecca Riley, and I'm the Teen and Adult Engagement Assistant Manager at OMSI, and I will be your host tonight. Before we get started, I have a couple of things to catch you up on what's happening with OMSI these days. So OMSI, the museum, is currently closed to the public, and we hope to reopen in the next few weeks. Please keep your eyeballs on our website, omsi.edu, for updates. And while we're closed, we still want to support everyone at home by sparking your curiosity and igniting your imagination. So to that end, we've crafted and curated all sorts of engaging science activities and experiments to inspire you to experience the wonder of science from wherever you are. Please visit omsi.edu for more information and resources. And if you do any of the fun science activities we post, please send us photos or videos so we can see what wonderful scientists you are. I also hope you enjoyed tonight's pre-pub trivia and music by local Portland artist Stephanie Schneiderman. We hope to have them play a live concert in OMSI's Planetarium sometime in 2021. Putting on these live shows takes a lot of work, and we have an amazing partner that helps us make this happen. So a big thanks and shout out to Celestream for providing the live streaming services for tonight's Science Pub. We really appreciate your support. Fun other stuff that's happening, even though the museum's closed, please everyone join us for our 4th virtual OMSI After Dark. Beyond the Bottle is a celebration of Stoller Family Estates award-winning wines. We have curated a box filled with a selection of 5 canned Oregon favorites. During this program, you can see yours truly as the host. Hello. And there will be science demos, wine experts, entertainment, music, magic, all sorts of great stuff, and kind of a variety show sort of situation at our virtual event on Friday, December 11th. Tickets are $50 and are available on our website. Also, 'tis the season of, actually, I think it is Giving Tuesday today. Hey, speaking of Giving Tuesday, all OMSI memberships are 15% off. They're on sale until January 1st. Please support your beloved local science museum, a great way to do that is to buy a membership or buy a membership for a family member or friend. Visit omsi.edu/membership for more information on that. We would also like for you to support your local community, support your museum, support your community. Part of your community is these wonderful food and beverage partners all over the state. And we would encourage you to put the pub back in Science Pub and order some delicious food and beverages from one of these fine folks. For tonight, tonight's event is going to be pretty much the same as all of our other, in format, not subject matter, as all of our other Science Pub programs. For those of you who don't know what this looks like, I shall tell you. We're going to first start with a climate change themed trivia game. That'll be a warm up for tonight's talk. So get your trivia brain, do a little brain head massage, some slaps, get the blood flowing so that you can play trivia along with me and one of our OMSI educators. Then after that, we'll have about 60-minute long lecture by 3 different professors from OSU. So you're getting 3 for the length of 1 today. We're just having lots of experts. This is pretty exciting. And then after that lecture, we will have a Q&A. And you can submit your questions for any or all of our speakers at any point during the lecture via the comments in our live feed. And we will collect them all. And then after the lecture, I'll ask those of our speakers. If you enjoyed tonight's lecture, please consider donating to OMSI. You can do this directly with the donate button on our Facebook page or omsi.edu/donate, or you can buy a Science Pub pint glass, which is pictured on your screen there. They're real cute. And don't worry, there's no pressure to donate. However, our mission at OMSI is to inspire curiosity by creating engaging science learning experiences for all people, no matter your age or background. So sit back, relax, and get ready for a wonderful lecture directly after we massage our brains with some trivia. This is my favorite part of the night. I would like to welcome one of our amazing educators, Jennifer Powers, to play along with me. Jennifer manages our big old featured hall at the museum, which right now is Genghis Khan, and in the future will involve dinosaurs. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Heck yes, it will. I'm great. How are you?
Doing great. Are you excited?
I am, and off screen, I've been giving myself a big brain massage, so I feel like I am extra prepared for this particular trivia game.
Excellent. Yeah. Do some like hype up.
Yeah.
In particular, you're super excited to learn about tonight?
You know, I feel like this is a topic that I really need to learn a lot about. So all of it. And I was watching them flip through their slides, and there's so many like fun graphs and animations and things. And it looks really exciting.
Yeah, it seems like a whole lot of information that we're going to get tonight. A whole lot of different subjects.
Yeah.
Very important to our survival as a species. So
yeah, it's a good one to learn about.
Okay, so for trivia today, what will happen is we will have 10 multiple choice questions. I'll read out the question, then give you time to guess, or not guess, but just know the answer. And then I'll reveal the answer to each question before we move on to the next one.
Got it. So I will know how well I am doing as we go.
Yeah. Are you ready?
I am. Hit me with it.
Okay, everyone at home, I hope you are also ready to learn some stuff. So we're starting out with a dinosaur question. I don't know if you've researched dinosaurs yet because our dinosaur exhibit won't happen until like March. But how long did the Cretaceous period last? Was it A, 8 million years, B, 80 million years, or C, 800 millions of years?
Millions and millions of years. Well, you're right. I have not done a whole lot of dinosaur research up to this point. So I'm going to just like go in the middle because I don't know. 80 million years.
80 million years?
Yeah.
You are correct. Yeah.
Perfect. Prepared to run that dinosaur exhibit.
Yeah, you don't even need to research. You can just skim on your knowledge of ancient Mongolia.
Very related, by the way, Mongolia and dinosaurs. So actually, maybe I am a little prepared.
That's true. Okay. Number 2. Another little curveball for you, not about dinosaurs.
Okay.
Which country fishes the largest area of the ocean? Spain, A, Spain, B, China, or C, USA?
The largest area of the ocean, huh? It's very weird they put Spain in there because Spain is very small in comparison to China or the United States. So part of me wants to pick that, but I'm gonna pick China. B.
You're going to pick China because you have a great sense for the right answer. Yeah, it's China. Okay, you're doing great. 2 out of 2, 100% for Jen. That massage is working out for everyone involved.
I'm glad you suggested it. It's really helping. Yeah.
What is the global refugee population as of late 2019? A, close to 40 million, B, close to 25 million, or C, close to 10 million? If I knew more about numbers, I'd give you some reference points for population-wise what this means, but I can't do that. I feel like California has about 40 million people in it, though.
Oh, then
Germany has about 40 million people. Am I right? I might be totally wrong.
are you Googling this off screen?
I am not. I should be. Don't pay attention to my in-brain statistics. They might be 100% wrong.
All right. Well, I also am not. These are hard questions because I'm not great at number references either. I'm going to hope for the low number and say C, although I don't know if that's right.
That is a pretty low number for all the different refugee crises that are happening. I mean, I'm not saying it's not 10 million.
And then is it A? Because the last 2 questions were B. Am I just going to pick B for the rest of the time? Okay, B, 25.
You're right.
All the logic, it just didn't work for that. I didn't want to pick B again. It seemed like the wrong answer.
Yeah. This is not a Scantron.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I gotta get out of that brain. Well, that's unfortunate that there are 25 million refugees in the world.
Yeah.
2018. I hope that our smart speakers talk to us about how to reduce that.
Another question on the same subject this time, not about dinosaurs. Okay. What word is used to describe policies that restrict refugee movements? A, encamping, B, warehousing, C, redlining, and D, bordering.
Redlining, C.
That one is about cities.
Is it? See,
Yeah, redlining.
Then bordering?
I want to just encourage you that this is not a Scantron.
B. I choose B. I don't know what it is.
It is.
That's probably the last word I would have chosen out of all of those, which maybe I should have started with that one.
Yeah, I don't know, but you're still doing great. Still 100%. You know me and my love of having everybody get 100%.
You're right. And I love it. I love it. I'm learning a lot during this 100% quiz I'm taking.
Number 5. In recent years, approximately how many refugees typically arrive in Oregon each year? So
B.
Is it A, 1,000 and 2,000, B, between 2,000 and 3,000, C, between 3,000 and 4,000?
Well, 2 things. 1, I want to guess B because obviously that has to be the answer. But 2, this image that we have that says "Welcome to Oregon, America's first sanctuary state." Is that true? I didn't know that.
I think that's going to be a great question for our speakers because I wasn't aware of that. I do know that the larger refugee resettlement areas tend to be in the middle of the country. But that doesn't have anything to do with time.
True. Then A, not very many.
Okay, educated guess is A. You are right, yeah.
Cool.
1 to 2,000 each year. I think my knowledge from when I lived in Colorado is they were around 3,000 each year, but they were one of the larger acceptees at the time. Okay.
All right.
Doing great. Number 6. That picture is beautiful. What country currently hosts the most refugees? A, Turkey, B, Germany, C, Bangladesh, or D, Uganda?
This is a very hard quiz that I'm not doing very good on.
You can think about the location of these countries versus other war-torn countries and refugee crises we hear about.
Yeah, so knowing that and knowing what limited things I know about the war-torn countries of our world right now, Turkey?
This picture is also a clue. Yeah, it's Turkey.
Yeah. Annual hot air balloon race. That looks beautiful.
Super beautiful. Yeah.
Let's go next year when we can travel.
We will be able to travel next year, obviously, because it's better. So yeah, let's do it. Jen and I, we're going to be a team on a balloon.
We'll zoom in for a science pub from Turkey. It's the plan.
From our balloon in Turkey.
You're right.
Which planets are... sorry, people, I'm getting some fun facts. I was pretty correct about the population of California. In retrospect, it's 39 million. And also, yes, Oregon is the first sanctuary state. So, updates on the past.
We are learning a lot.
Which planets are in the habitable zone of our solar system? Only Earth, Venus, Earth, and Mars, or just Earth and Mars? This picture, our moon is gigantic. Look at that puppy.
Yeah. Huh. I'm going to go with B.
Yeah. Which means we can go live with whatever those little fart creatures they discovered on Venus, or live with the Curiosity rover on Mars.
That sounds perfect. It sounds like can we do that after Turkey?
Okay. Like that we're coming up with our itinerary. Okay. Number 8. We might say a place has become effectively uninhabitable if climate change impacts A, destroy people's homes, B, destroy people's livelihoods, or C, result in many deaths.
There's not an all of the above answer on this one. Okay, if we're thinking of humans as animals and our place, our habitat has become uninhabitable, I would say that if there's a lot of deaths, then our homes and our livelihoods are also probably destroyed. I'm going with C.
That is a true thing, but there can be things that happen that just cause a lot of deaths at once, but then it's still everything's after that happens.
So then our homes? And are we saying homes as in just like our ability to exist in an ecosystem?
I would call home as like a structure.
I'm thinking of humans as animals and I shouldn't be. So I guess the answer that I haven't talked to you about is B, and I should just always choose B in this because they've set up the questions in a way that makes me feel like I'm going to get it wrong by choosing B, but I'm right.
I feel like the way I look at this is livelihoods is the broadest descriptor here. So I feel like that maybe we'll learn more about what the definition of a livelihood is. But that's what it is.
Well, there you go. I really do need to watch this talk.
Yeah, we can no longer live in our hood, then we can't live there.
That's a true statement.
I'm gonna move on from that statement. Sorry, everyone. Okay. Humanity's superpower. Ooh, Jen, this is great. What is humanity's superpower? A, technology, B, intelligence, C, cooperation, or D, resources?
I also want an all of the above on this one too.
The picture is a clue.
The encompassing thing that you just did, I feel like if we are not cooperative, we will not have shared intelligence, shared technology, or shared resources. So C.
Ooh, Jen, so good. You did that so well. You must be an educator. Yeah. Okay.
Finally I made an educated guess and I got one right, and the answer was not B.
It was not B. Yeah, you used some brain massage skills on that one. I just want to point that out to fluff you up for this last one.
Thank you.
In order to avoid, quote, dangerous climate change, humanity needs to cut global emissions of greenhouse gases by half in how many years? A, 30, B, 50, or D, by the 22nd century?
A, as ASAP.
As soon as possible. I think yesterday. I think we needed to cut them in half by exactly 1 day ago.
You're exactly right.
Jen, you did great. 10 out of 10. Amazing. I hope everyone at home was also able to learn a lot and get all of the things correct.
And that you didn't have a Scantron, so you weren't thrown off. Just like that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me, Jen. I will see you next year in Turkey, but not before then.
No, definitely not beforehand. I'll meet you on the hot air balloon.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right, bye.
Okay, now I would like to introduce our speakers, all three of them. Dr. James Watson, Dr. Jamon van den Hoek, and Dr. David Wrathall are all assistant professors in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Science at Oregon State University. James studies the structure and dynamics of complex systems, ranging from ecosystems to financial markets to the Earth. Jamon studies climate impacts on the spatial distribution of human communities. And David is an expert on climate change and human migration, and also studies the relationship between climate change, violent conflict, and displacement. James, Jamon, and David are dedicated to advancing knowledge and understanding of our planet and people to help communities prepare for the coming challenges that we will all face this century. So that is enough talking from me. Please welcome me in joining James. Nope, please join me in welcoming James, our first speaker from the group. Hey, James.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks so much for the generous introduction and the quiz too. I don't think I got everything right, but I not as good.
We're all learning together. Are you able to share your screen?
I am. Yeah. Let me just share my slides. So can you see my slides now?
Looks great. So thanks, James. Take it away.
All right. Thank you. And hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming to our talk. So yeah, we're going to introduce you to a new initiative that we're developing at Oregon State University. It's called the 22nd Century Survival Project. So let's start with Earth's history, its geological record. The Earth is around 4.6 billion years old, and geologists have divided its history into certain epochs. So you'll be familiar with the Cretaceous period. This is when dinosaurs roamed the planet some 100 million years ago. And this period lasted 80 million years. Another period in Earth's history is the Pleistocene. This is when woolly mammoths were hunted by early humans, and it existed all the way up to around 12,000 years ago. 12,000 years ago sees the start of the Holocene, the recent period in Earth's history when human civilization really went into overdrive. Now, we may think that we were destined to form our current civilization, but the reality is the reason why we are where we are today is partly because we were very lucky. So consider this timeline: age before present on the x-axis, and the temperature over Greenland on the y-axis. Now, for tens and even hundreds of thousands of years, the Earth's climate was so variable that human civilization was not able to start. It was only around 12,000 years ago that the Earth moved into a new period of relative climatic stability. This is the Holocene. It is only because of this environmental stability that human civilization was able to kickstart and grow into what it is today. Now, however, all of that is in the past now. The Holocene actually ended around 75 years ago. We are now living through a new period of Earth's history called the Anthropocene. So we're dominating our planet to such an extent that no ecosystem, no organism, no place is untouched by human activity. And this is the hallmark of the Anthropocene, our impact on the Earth's geological record. Now, some date the start of the Anthropocene to the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, while others place the date as the 16th of July 1945, when the first nuclear weapons tests were conducted as part of the Manhattan Project in the US. And the Anthropocene is amazing. We can all do wonderful things. We've built megacities. I can get whatever I want delivered to my doorstep. Pre-pandemic, I was able to fly around the planet, and I can watch an ungodly amount of online media. I can talk to my collaborators from around the world using Zoom, and I can also eat foods from various places around the world, and students can come from around the world to Oregon State University to get an education with me. But while amazing, the Anthropocene has its costs. The social media that we use is having negative impacts on our mental health, especially our children. Plastic trash has been found both in the deepest parts of our oceans, so that's the Mariana Trench, as well as the top of Mount Everest. And we're converting the majority of the Amazon rainforest, the lungs of our planet, into soy farms. Financial institutions are creating more, not less risk, and diseases are spreading globally and with more frequency. And last but not least, climate change is starting to bite. So the question is, if dinosaurs in the Cretaceous lasted 80 million years, and the Anthropocene is only 75 years old, how much longer do you think we're going to last? Will it be 1 million years? Or how about 100,000 years? What do you think is respectable? 10,000 years? Or maybe the Anthropocene will just be an anomalous blip in Earth's history. So to answer this question, we have to ask, well, what makes the Anthropocene so special? Let us first consider the scale of human impacts. So unlike the Cretaceous or the Pleistocene or the Holocene, the Anthropocene is the first period of Earth's history where one species, us, humans, is having a global impact on the planet's biogeochemistry and its biota. Now, in addition to the global scale of human impacts, we are ever more connected. Through social media, our social networks have expanded. In addition, the global supply and trade of goods like clothes and food is also hyper-connected at a global scale. And behind a lot of this is the connectivity of our financial institutions. So this could be evidenced in our gigantic pension funds like BlackRock, who manage assets totaling around $6.84 trillion. Or in terms of the technology we use every day, like our iPhones, whose parts come from all over the world, or simply the financial agreements that countries have with one another. Now, while this connectivity provides stable pensions, a constant supply of new phones every year, or financial stimuli to alleviate economic depressions, there is a downside to this connectivity. It's encapsulated by the statement that connectivity is risk. So when thinking of risk, think of the position of dominoes on a table. Risk is when the dominoes have been arranged so that if one falls, then they all fall. In a way, this is in part how our financial systems, our food supply systems are arranged. So for example, in 2008, when the financial crisis happened then, driven in large part by the subprime mortgage lending in the US housing market, this was the push on the first domino. And due to the connectivity of financial institutions, this shock spread globally, and indeed its economic impacts led to a series of issues many years later, including the Greek government debt crisis. What we realized then was the importance of systemic risk and how risk can spread through entire systems. What we're seeing today in terms of the COVID pandemic is something called super system risk. Now, this is when a shock spreads to multiple world systems. So for example, the pandemic spread quickly and globally through our transportation systems. It then overloaded our healthcare systems, dismantled much of our service industries, affected our global food supply chains, and indeed our social networks. which have shrunk due to social distancing, and this is having an adverse impact on mental health. Okay, everything I've talked about so far relates to the structure of our global society. But in addition, new abilities and functions driven by exponential technologies are also presenting opportunities and challenges. So in particular, the rise of artificial intelligence, robotization and automation, and just this recently, through the use of CRISPR gene editing technology, the first genetically modified humans were born in China. The issue with these technologies has to do with our abilities to keep up with them. So people are linear. What this means is that if you walk 10 times 1 minute, you'll end up 10 minutes away. This is different for technology, though. If phone tech doubles in speed every year for 10 years, the tech is actually 1,000 times faster after 10 years. But the true challenge, though, is that policy is sublinear. That is, it just takes forever to update policies or develop new restrictions. So just take, for example, the old tech that we're still struggling to deal with. So nuclear power and weapons and fossil fuel emissions. Now, we have the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons signed by Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987, but we're still trying to figure out how to deal with fossil fuel technologies through climate change agreements, for example. Okay, so let's pause and think about all of this in terms of the potential arc of our global civilization, of the Anthropocene, and let's discuss something called the Great Filter. So this is a hypothetical filter that blocks the development of civilizations throughout the universe. The idea is this: if you can imagine a super long timeline, on one end is a primordial soup of organic molecules that are required for life. And on the other end, there's a galactic civilization that is super amazing in all ways. The idea of the Great Filter, or filters, is that to go from the primordial soup to the galactic empire, organisms and ultimately civilizations have to get over certain large biological, technical, and societal hurdles. The first is thought to be the formation of the eukaryotic cell. So this is when mitochondria formed a symbiotic relationship with early bacteria, providing them the necessary boost in energy to form more complex organelles. Now you can imagine a huge number of failed attempts to get through this filter. Eventually, though, one does. And this newly formed eukaryotic cell then goes on to be the foundation for all complex life on the planet. Ultimately, one species gets its act together, goes through rapid change, leading to the creation of novel technologies, one being nuclear power and weapons. And it's often thought that nuclear power is one of these great filters. One of the reasons why we're not seeing evidence of alien civilizations in the heavens is because any advanced civilization that creates nuclear power then blows themselves up. But just like the formation of the eukaryotic cell, perhaps one civilization gets through this filter and makes it to the other side. Perhaps this is us, and we are on our way to the stars. But some are saying that there still exist great filters in front of us. Some just that actually it's social media that will end up being our downfall. And perhaps there's some truth to this, because the degradation of our information systems by social media, so the information upon which we base our beliefs and preferences, is diminishing our ability to overcome the biggest problems facing us, in particular, climate change. Now, I would posit this: cooperation is our superpower. And this is how we've come through some of the great filters of the past. We have de-escalated the use of nuclear arms. In prehistoric times, our strength wasn't in our muscles or bones. The Neanderthals were stronger than us physically. Our strength came from working together. Indeed, the formation of the eukaryotic cell was perhaps the single most important instance of cooperation in Earth's history. And looking at us now, and the next 80 years, in order to get through the potential filters sitting in front of us today, will surely require great amounts of cooperation. Now, I'm actually not saying anything new. Indeed, when we talk about climate change, we don't just talk about technological innovation like solar or wind power or nuclear fusion, although these are important parts of the solution. We also don't just talk about Earth system science either. The science is in. We know how the Earth responds to increasing carbon concentrations in our atmosphere. It gets warmer. What we do talk about is cooperation. The Paris Climate Agreement, the Kyoto Climate Agreement. We talk about how the only way to solve this problem is through doing so collectively. We do this because our planet is a common pool resource, as economists would say. Indeed, several eminent economists are relevant here. On the left is Garrett Hardin, who solidified our understanding of the tragedy of the commons. And in the middle is a Nobel Award-winning economist, Elinor Ostrom, who greatly advanced our understanding of cooperative solutions to problems of the commons. Now, climate agreements are hard, but we have plenty of smaller case studies that show us how we can create cooperative solutions. One famous example is how we solved the problem of the ozone hole over the South Pole through an international agreement that banned the use of various aerosols. This was the Montreal Protocol. At more local scales, we're learning that people figure out how to solve collective action problems all the time, often left to their own devices. For example, fishing communities around the world have developed cooperatives that manage their fisheries sustainably. Elinor Ostrom in particular did a lot of work in this area. Now, on the topic of fisheries, I want to take this opportunity to give you a brief introduction to some of the research being done in my lab at OSU. Specifically, this is the issue of when cooperation breaks down in fisheries and how this relates to geopolitical tension and risk. So here I'm showing you the title from one of my favorite recent papers. It talks about something called femto risks. These are the relatively insignificant actions by small-scale actors, individual fishermen, for example, that can spiral out of control and end up creating international crises. The photo in the bottom left refers to the cod wars from around 60 years ago between the UK and Iceland, where fishing boats actually rammed naval vessels. And now here on the right, I'm showing you a picture of today's Chinese fishing vessels, which operate globally. And they're a large part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, and they've been a source of much international stress recently. So this is the framing of my research, and here are the research questions. Ultimately, we want to be able to identify new sources of these fishy femto risks. And to do so, we want to answer two further questions. Where are there lots of nations fishing in the same spot? And do these nations have a history of cooperation or conflict? To answer these questions, we have synthesized fishing vessel location data for the whole globe with the help of Global Fishing Watch. When you look at these data, you can quantify the total area fished by different nations. And we can see that China has a huge global footprint. Indeed, it fishes in every sea, the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian, the Arctic, and Southern Oceans. But China's not an outlier, though. Spain, too, has a global fishing footprint. In general, when you look at the total area fished by different nations, we see that China fishes the largest area of the oceans, but many nations fish to a similar degree. So Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Spain, Russia, and the US, for example. Now, can we use these data to quantify who is stepping on whose toes? The answer is yes. These data allow us to make these spatial overlap maps. So up in the top left is the spatial distribution of fishing effort by the US, so that's in purple, China in green, and the places where they overlap in yellow. These are places where fishing vessels from these two nations have been found working in close proximity. We can see that for the US and China, it's the equatorial Pacific that is the hotspot. For the USA and Spain, there's again a hotspot in the equatorial Pacific, but also in the North Atlantic. Now, why is this important? Well, now we can identify places with an increasing number of competing nations. These are the potential hotspots of geopolitical risk over fisheries, our common pool resource. And this is why I'm again showing you a picture of Elinor Ostrom. The solutions she worked on for fisheries management, for dealing with fishy femto risks, can inform solutions for climate change and other big collective action problems that we are facing. So if we can do so, learning from fishery science, say, and from the economists that have created solutions to the tragedy of the commons more generally, then we will be in a better place to break through the great filters of the 21st century. It's important to recognize that even though we stand a chance of breaking through the great filters of the 21st century, it won't be easy and negative impacts will be disproportionately distributed. That is, some people get hit harder than others. And to help everyone get through these great filters, especially climate change, there is a need to quantify the risk of negative impacts for states, counties, cities, businesses, anyone with an asset whose value is determined in some part by the environment, even individual people. Because, you know, when asked whether I know my own family's personal risk to climate change, it's hard to provide an answer. So this is what the 22nd Century Survival Project is all about, providing actionable information so that we can all make informed decisions about how to deal with the changes that are coming in the next few decades. Okay, so right now I'm going to hand you over to Jamon van den Hoek and David Wrathall, who will land the plane, so to speak. I know I've been flying at a high altitude, and they'll provide commentary about specific aspects of climate change that we all need to know about. Thanks. Look forward to your questions.
Thanks, James. Can everyone hear me? Hope so. Thanks for the introduction, and very happy to be with you all here tonight. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about maybe take some steps down a problematization of these questions of, for example, asking the question, what happens when cooperation doesn't go to plan? Many of you may imagine images like this. Large-scale cities, this is one of the more sort of commonly used tropes we could think of in that way of when cooperation fails, which is large-scale urban violent conflict, armed conflict, buildings reduced to rubble, buildings reduced to ruins and populations, big forced to leave. We see this and have seen this in Syria over the last decade with the civil war that's been ongoing almost for 10 years now. See this in a more recent civil war in Yemen, comparable levels of destruction. And these are just some of the large-scale civil wars that we've seen. One thing, such as in South Sudan in recent years as well, one thing that is shared between these crises is these large-scale violent conflicts is the degree, the amount of populations that are forcibly displaced, that have no other choice other than to leave their home. They could be displaced internally. We commonly refer to that as IDPs, internally displaced peoples, or they could be displaced internationally. Those would be, assuming there's some formal asylum-seeking effort made, we would consider those refugees. Now, refugees are in a very unique circumstance in the global, in the sort of global view, because there are over 26 million, or nearly 26 million refugees currently displaced by violence. So it's very large scale. It's also a global phenomenon, as you can see here. Most countries in the world have refugees, and the bulk of them, about 2/3 of them, of refugees currently reside within the continent of Africa. These populations not only highly vulnerable to the conflict from which they have been forced away, they've fled these conflicts. My talk is going to be getting into how these populations are also highly vulnerable to current as well as future effects of climate change. Now, we would argue that better understanding the plight of refugees through a climate lens is not purely based on advocacy grounds, but is also a very effective means of understanding the scope and the severity of climate change problems that are affecting millions of people around the globe today and will do so for the future. So in some ways, some refugee populations are already experiencing some societal constraints and climate constraints that the rest of the world hasn't yet experienced. So one thing in terms of understanding climate effects at refugee camps is that there's extreme variability. Camp to camp, country to country, there is a broad range of conditions. You can see here just very plain differences in some. These are at different scales, but very different layouts, very different landscapes. Semi-arid on the left, very flat on the left, and very rugged, wooded and subsequently denuded landscape after refugees arrived. That picture on the right is an overhead view of Cox's Bazar. It's a very well-known refugee camp where millions of Rohingya thousands of Rohingya have settled over the past several years. This scenario where individual dwellings, individual structures are carved out of the landscape in a terraced formation, making them highly vulnerable to erosion and landslides and mudslides with extreme precipitation. That is a very different kind of scenario compared to what we might see with a Syrian refugee camp. This is Zatari in Jordan, another very well-known, very large refugee camp. Here we perhaps don't have the same overarching concerns about landslides and mudslides, but we have concerns over extreme heat stress. So different climatic stressors, different climate hazards experienced by these two different refugee populations, who in many ways share a lot of commonalities. but their climate exposure is quite markedly different. Now, another thing that that is unfortunately really all too common across the global refugee map is the prevalence of a practice called warehousing, which is where refugee populations are confined to their camps, to their immediate surroundings for years, sometimes decades or generations on end. This is not a short-term practice. It's a rather brutal term, in my opinion. It's a commonly used term, warehousing. It's a very dehumanizing term. But this is unfortunately, it's changing in recent years, but it's still a fairly common practice to isolate, marginalize, and keep refugee populations really at the periphery, at the border of whichever country happens to be hosting them. This practice is also an extremely good predictor of how long refugees stay put. If you are warehoused, you don't leave. You cannot leave. So it is very commonly associated with with protraction, which is to say long-term habitation in a refugee camp. So even during periods of extreme climatic stress, political turmoil, you name it, reasons why people would want to leave the place they're in for more desirable conditions or a safer place to raise their family, warehousing restricts that. So even during periods of extreme climate stress, refugees cannot leave. And there's no record of offering any lenience to allow them to leave during periods of climate stress. So the refugee problem is global in scale. It is a refugee challenge, I should say, is global in scale. The problems faced by refugees are in some ways not unlike the problems faced by other populations, except for perhaps some key differences, which is the extreme restrictions on some of their movements. Now, the locations that refugee camps may be settled in as well also show marked differences, may show marked differences with other potentially inhabitable areas. We know that the world, if we look at the full world map as we have here, it's not a uniformly suitable place. People can't live underwater, can't live in the ocean. We can't live on an ice cap. We also generally don't live in desert regions for very long periods of time. These are uninhabitable, highly low regions with very low suitability. So this is a map from a recent paper, linked to at the bottom here. These dashed lines, regions sort of in boreal regions going north in Canada and Siberia and some of Scandinavia. Anywhere north of that is basically beyond suitability. There's for long stretches of time, no large population can really live there. You see the other area, large area would be the Tibetan Plateau, which is also very, very low suitability. So these are extremely uninhabitable regions. Where human beings can live, where it's habitable, one could think of that as our climate niche. This is our sweet spot. This is our Goldilocks zone where human beings have for millennia lived. This is where civilization has started. This is where all the major inventions you could ever think about have taken place. This is where agriculture started. This is where language started. These conditions broadly are driven, they're influenced by a whole host of different things, of course, but a recent study shows that these are broadly driven by mean annual, or correlated with mean annual precipitation and temperature. We learn a lot about where people can live and where we as human beings have lived just looking at temperature and precipitation. It's quite simple, it's quite elegant. These areas also, these sweet spots that I've highlighted here in these ellipses here in the upper row, we've lived in these sweet spots as far as we can go back. There's differences, but there's also shared regions between these. There's some consistency over time. Where we're living now in this red dashed box in the upper left-hand corner is not going to say the same. Where we live right now is we are being pushed out of this climate niche because climate change, because of our own actions, burning too many fossil fuels, is forcing us out of this climate niche. If we go to 2070, we can see the map of suitability has totally changed. areas that were unsuitable still will be unsuitable. But now we're seeing broad swaths of the Sahara, parts of the Persian Gulf are basically beyond any degree of marginality. And overall, though, some of the regions of the globe won't see that much change. This sort of area in the yellow or the very lightest green in this area, or in this map, broad swaths of the globe will be affected by this way. Broad swaths of humanity will be directly affected. We'll see extreme losses of suitability. Other areas will see moderate, or in some cases, fairly high increase in suitability as far as we understand suitability just for things like growing crops. But again, this is very uneven, highly variable. One sort of shocking finding from this study is that under the business as usual scenario, this is paraphrasing the article, about 3.5 billion people, which is approximately 30% of the expected population as of 2070, would have to migrate in order for that population to live in that same kind of climate niche. It's not to say that they can't live there, they're just not in that same sweet spot that the people have enjoyed in the past and that our ancestors broadly have relied on to survive. So 3.5 billion people, 30% of future population. In 2070, some of us will be well into retirement. I'm sure many of the people on this call that perhaps they will themselves be middle-aged or their children will be middle-aged. This is not far away, right? 50 years. In terms of the geologic time periods that James was just mentioning is less than a blink of the eye. So thinking about how these climate changes are going to be affecting some of the most vulnerable populations, well, we don't have to wait till 2070. We already know that these areas that are poised to experience some of the most extreme degradation already are. This is a map here showing on the right. This is a little bit of a jargony legend, but the gist of this is that there are broad swaths in this refugee hosting region, which I've put a black box on, which are going to see extremely very, very low negative, that have seen rather very negative trends. They've seen extreme degradation in terms of the vegetative condition. This is over the past 3 decades. We know that this story of who benefits and who loses is itself variable. This is because of varying sensitivities to climate change, mainly through these dimensions of water, precipitation, temperature, and atmospheric conditions, really cloud cover. This is a map from another recent paper that I thought is a very elegant approach. You can see the sort of combination of these 3 different colors, including the white areas, which are masked out from the study. You can see just the ebbs and flows of these colors. This is, again, like a very different story depending on where you're at. If you're in the United States versus if you're in the Pacific Northwest rainforest compared to the tropical rainforest in Southern America, you will see very different sort of vegetative sensitivity. Now, this really boils down to these 2 factors, right? Mean annual surface temperature, which I have a map of future model a couple decades out showing here. Again, our refugee hosting hotspot area, and the change in precipitation. These 2 factors underpin most of what we're understanding. Derived variables, derived data sets that are relevant for understanding climatic stress or vulnerability come from these 2 variables. So these are really at the core of it. We wanted to know the current camps that exist, right? As of 2019, are they already in extremely climatically marginal regions? We know generally that they are in the, sub-Saharan Africa is broadly seeing a lot of degradation in terms of vegetation, but it really varies locally, doesn't it? So we asked this question, how marginal are current refugee camps? So we looked at refugee camps in 2019, and we looked at a series of control sites as well around the globe. And we looked at rainfall, future changes in rainfall, and air temperature, same variables that these other studies have been looking at. And just to focus on 3 of the countries that have very large refugee populations, Turkey has the largest refugee population, 4 million refugees, mainly from Syria. Well, Turkey sees, if we look in the lower left here, currently refugee camps tend to see much more precipitation compared to comparable sort of peer sites around the country, making these areas vulnerable for flash floods. We, jumping to the right-hand side, the temperature change graph, we see from this that the median temperature increase at Turkey's refugee camps is over 0.3 degrees Celsius more than the rest of the country. So in a country like Turkey that's already poised to see, on average, increases in temperature in the next couple of decades, refugee camps are going to be at the extreme end of that distribution. Pakistan, sort of similar story. If we look at precipitation, home to 1.4 million Afghan refugees. If we look at precipitation on the left side, more general precipitation in refugee camps, making them vulnerable to current flash flooding and landslide conditions. We look at temperature change, same, even more extreme story. The median temperature increase in refugee camps in Pakistan, well above what we would expect to see outside. Uganda, a little bit different of a story. Uganda's home to 1.2 million refugees. And here we don't quite see as pronounced of an effect. In fact, Uganda's refugee camps on the whole are going to be experiencing somewhat comparable, like the median experience at a refugee camp in Uganda is going to be comparable to the climate change effects around the country. With this approach, a real strength of it is we can actually hone in on specific camps that are going to see the worst of climate effects, the most marginalized currently, as well as those that are poised to see the most extreme effects. This allows us to identify very place-specific solutions or plans for climate adaptation and mitigation. This is a laser, opens the door to a laser-focused intervention going forward. Now I'm going to shift it to David Wrathall in a moment, but in part by means of transition to David's work, but also in part to wrap up my section, these changes that we're seeing are not, world leaders are not oblivious to these, right? We may be able to put some specific numbers to this and add a narrative to it, but broadly, we know that that these changes are coming and that everyone is going to be affected by them. We have a whole series of frameworks that have been in place. I'm just showing 3 that are relevant here: the Global Compact on Refugees, the Global Compact on Migration, and the UNFCCC, which is a broad framework on climate change. These 3 together, if we dug into the text of these frameworks, we would see a lot of valuable policy recommendations and ways forward to address these problems that we're speaking about tonight. However, these frameworks move very slowly at sublinear speeds, as James mentioned. And I'd like to point out that they're very new in terms of frameworks to get everyone on board to address these problems. The Global Compact on Refugees, a massive success. It's less than 2 years, or a little over 2 years old now. UNHCR has been around since 1950. So it took 68 years to get this Global Compact on Refugees together, which is not in any way disparaging the compact. It's just an effort to highlight the fact of how the gaps between the identification of the problem and development of solutions to address it, because these problems span all these compacts. They're global, they affect the most marginalized, they affect the poorest, they affect the people way over there, they don't affect us, right? This kind of thinking is in part why these policies move so slowly. That's a flawed way of thinking, however. These concerns may seem a world away, but really, yes, they're an ocean away if we want to think about what's happening across the Atlantic or across the Pacific from Oregon, but really they're just a few decades away. The kinds of experiences that we will be facing in Oregon by the end of the century may be comparable to what other communities are already facing today. So if we look at Oregon here, where I've kind of blown up this map and then put a little circle close to where Oregon is, without having a good geographic reference here, zooming in on this, look at where we're at. If you recall, green is an increase in suitability, red and orange is a decrease in suitability. We are at the threshold, right? We are just north of an area that is going to be experiencing, by this paper's results, extreme loss in suitability. Doesn't mean that we won't be affected. It means that by 2070, we will be on the receiving end of populations moving north from areas that are considered less suitable, which is to say, most of California. We also are going to, and we should welcome our Californian resident or neighbors in that who are dealing with these climatic challenges. But it's fair to say as well that this story doesn't end at 2070, and it doesn't end at 2100, and it doesn't end at 2500, right? Just because we're looking okay on this map now doesn't mean that we're going to look okay 50 years from now if this study were to be extended. So this is a very worrying and concerning long-term problem that we're facing, and that we in the 22nd Century Survival Project have been working towards developing kind of a common way of approaching. And with that, I will transition or hand it over to David.
Hey folks, I'm David. My camera's on. All right, I couldn't figure out how to turn the camera on. All right, here we go. So we are, we're diving in. That was an incredibly good setup from both James and Jamon. Thank you so much for leading us in this discussion. I'm gonna try to bring us back home all the way to the state of Oregon. So I'm David. I'm an assistant professor at the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Science at Oregon State University. And I'm a lead author in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 6th assessment, which is coming out this year. This is the UN climate assessment that we do periodically. And my role in this is to study, I'm an expert on human migration and climate change. And so what I'm gonna do is we've synthesized some of the state of our knowledge on this stuff, why people move in response to climate change. And I'm gonna boil that down for you in the course of this and see if we can take us through an example of what migration tells us about the essential habitability of our planet. One of the concerns of climate change is that it's rendering our planet less safe, less stable, and less fair, less habitable. But what does that really mean? So if you look around in the academic research on habitability, what you're going to find is a lot of papers from astrophysicists on the Goldilocks zone, this sort of area of planets that circulate a central star where water can remain in liquid form in equatorial regions. And so under this definition, Venus is habitable, Earth is habitable, Mars is habitable. But we look at pictures that come back from the Mars rover, and it's really hard to imagine this place as suitable for sustaining all of the dimensions of human life that we require. It's impossible to imagine a cornfield here with bees flying around, rainfall that would be adequate to really deliver what we would consider a habitable planet. In fact, if you look at our planet, you'll see instances in which we're already moving across the margins of habitability. So you're looking at one of the maps of a map of one of the states in the United States 10,000 years from now. If we continue to on our current trajectory of carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and we allow those emissions to bake their way through our planetary system, what happens to sea levels and how the coasts of the United States change. So what state is this? it's the state of Florida. Even under our noses, the Earth's habitability is changing. We don't have to look to other planets to see this happening. So this is a common diagram. It's confusing, it's complex, but what it helps us do is understand the effect of our emissions on the future atmosphere, the future planet. So there's Jamon has mentioned this RCP 8.5. This is what we call the business as usual scenario. This is in red, and we can contrast that with this RCP 2.6, this very, very aggressive approach to climate change to really reduce our emissions as quickly as possible to avoid dangerous anthropogenic interference. So if we look at these, if we compare and contrast these, RCP 2.6, this is the sort of dream come true. We see very dramatic differences in terms of what happens with sea level rise and what happens to the habitability of coastlines. So in the United States, under RCP 2.6, in the year 2100, there'll be about 10.5 million people displaced on our coastlines, people living in places that will be uninhabitable in the future just because of sea level rise, setting aside all of these other issues of temperature and rainfall. So then under a business as usual, if we continue as we are, this RCP 8.5, it's a very dramatically different world. So more than double the amount of people exposed to sea level rise by 2100. And it just bears noting that in order to achieve this, to avoid dangerous anthropogenic interference, to avoid dangerous climate change, what we need to do is have our emissions by 2030. Global emissions have to come down 1/2 in 10 years. And then by the 2050s, we need to reduce those to zero. And this allows us to avoid what we think of as the catastrophic impacts of climate change. So what happens as places become uninhabitable? We can think about migration as a signal of an essential shift in a locations, in a places, in a system's habitability. So what you're looking at is a map of the Miami area and the projected migration flows that will originate from this area as the sea level rises to 2100 under a business as usual scenario. And so this migration, as it flows over time, different people making decisions to move for different reasons because it's affecting their jobs, it's affecting their incomes, it's affecting their schools, the hospitals that they rely on. These decisions are the signal that a change in habitability has occurred. And what it also shows is this migration is it stretches the distance between places that become uninhabitable and those places that are relatively unaffected by those climate change impacts. What we see is that all of us bear the consequences of these sorts of impacts as habitability shifts. Okay, so habitability it's a change in a system state. We can imagine that a place is perfectly habitable for all of the dimensions of human life. You're seeing this map over here. It's two pictures contrasted. What you see is a population. It's Bataya, Honduras. To the north is the Caribbean. To the south is a river. And this community has been there for about 200 years, sitting on this sandbar. So as we add climate change related stressors, it can affect the basic dimensions of this system and tip it into in what we would consider an uninhabitable state. So this tipping point occurs suddenly. It's unpredictable. It happens at a time that we don't expect it, and it's very difficult to reverse without huge amounts of energy to invest it in these areas. And so as this tip occurs, the migration that results is a signal that threshold has been crossed. And so we can start to look at large migration flows around the world and understand the dimensions of habitability that are being breached, that are being undermined. So you're looking at this picture of a caravan of about 4,500 Central Americans in Mexico City at the present moment that are being housed in this tent. So over the last 10 years or so, this group of Central American migrants is simply one of many groups of caravans of Central Americans and a long, slow, steady flow of migrants that have originated from the region. So what is happening in Central America that is causing this? What is this a signal of? We know that the region has been enduring 25 years of extreme weather events. This is a picture of flooding in La Ceiba, Honduras. This is a region I know very well. This is a bridge that I've crossed on a bicycle dozens of times. This is not the first time this bridge is washed out, and it certainly won't be the last. Honduras this year was hit by 2 major hurricanes within a 2-week period, and other major tropical storms. So adding up these extreme weather events, life becomes really hard. Add to that violence. You're looking at Ciudad España. This is a resettlement community of displaced people who were displaced in Hurricane Mitch in 1998. They were resettled in this area. Gang violence overtook the settlement, the community, and now this place, Honduras in general, endures the highest homicide rates on the planet. If you're a teenage boy in Honduras, you could consider this place uninhabitable. And so here you have these boys standing around considering what could be their future. And so what we've seen in Central America is in addition to violence and weather extremes, we've seen a process of impoverishment that has driven not just young working age males who are kind of traditional migrants, but entire families who are braving the risks that occur along the way, who are braving this policy of child separation that we've done for the last few years. And then they're approaching a militarized border, and yet the risk is worth it. So we might consider the problems in Central America as something about the essential habitability of the region. And as climate change occurs, as it intensifies, we might see this in other regions throughout the world. In fact, we already have. There's several migration crises going on globally at the present moment. And this is just the beginning of the 21st century. We haven't stepped that far into it. There's still yet to come. So let's consider this migration that occurs in the context of climate change impacts as a signal of things that are happening. So what I'm going to do now is distill to you 3 dimensions of habitability that we see when we look at all the cases of climate change impacts and migration. There are 3 basic dimensions of habitability that when climate change impacts or other impacts occur, we see migration as this signal. And the first is human survival. So when there are threats to our physical, psychological, or social health, we see forms of mobility ranging from temporary evacuation to long-term displacement around those threats, to direct threats to human survival. If a place is not safe, we'll see forms of mobility as a result of that. One of the big lessons that we learn across the studies on migration and climate change is that if you cannot earn a living in a place, then you can't live there. So as there are livelihood problems, when people's livelihoods become reduced and then essentially threatened by climate change impacts, if you can't grow food, if you can't fish anymore, if you can't commute to work because the infrastructure that you rely on is unsustainable in the face of sea level rise, then you will not live in a place. And so if we threaten livelihood resilience, then that's another that's another driver of migration. And the last is this dimension that we call human security. And this is a little more complex, but we can really boil it down to the capacity to adapt to a threat, to the things that we feel are important, our basic needs, our basic rights, our basic dignity. If we can't adjust to the threats that might occur to those things, like our ability to drink water, like our ability to earn food, to raise food, to acquire water, to educate our children, then we can see migration as a result of that. So let me just sort of bring this back to sea level rise, an instance in which we see in a single community stressed by sea level rise, simultaneous responses to these threats. We'll see mobility that is a response to human survival, mobility that's a response to livelihood impacts, and responses to human security in the same community. And let me just sort of make this really clear to you. So this is a community right here you're represented in this arrow that is a certain level above, elevation above sea level, that over time becomes, it moves from low probability, low risk of exposure to sea level rise to certain probability. It will be inundated. So if we look at this on the map, what this community looks like, we'll see multiple overlapping forms of migration occurring simultaneously as different people in a population in different locations are threatened in different ways. And so we might see displacement, we might see evacuation, we might see short-term migration, seasonal migration, urbanization. We might see the emergence of trapped populations. So I've listed these all out right here: short distance, urbanization, permanent migration, et cetera, as I was just saying. We might even see movement towards risk as people take advantage of areas that are too risky for some people and acquire beachfront property, say, and we call that climate gentrification. So the point I want to make here, and to bring it all back home, is that we have the ability to influence all of the major dimensions of each of these forms of migration that can occur simultaneously with our cooperation. So don't pay any attention to this. It's too complex, too much information to absorb at once. But these are individual policies that can affect the key dimensions of all of these forms of migration that would result as a population was exposed to sea level rise. We can determine the outcomes by our cooperation. So bringing it back home to Oregon, how many people will bringing it back, kind of putting this all in perspective, how many people are going to migrate because of climate change? The answer is that it depends on our ability to cooperate, not just on emissions. Like I was talking about earlier, we need to draw our emissions down. And the faster we do that, the fewer people will be exposed to climate change pressures. But the key, we can cooperate on the key aspects of life that make it habitable, that make the world habitable in the places that are exposed to climate change impacts. So taking it home to Oregon, what's it going to be like here? We've got a taste of that this year. We've had a taste already in the recent past. In the mid 2000s, the ocean acidification, we saw an episode of ocean acidification that affected fisheries and shell fisheries on the Oregon coast. We've seen a drought in the past 20 years, a severe drought in every year except one. We saw this summer what happens when drought is extended over periods of time, and it stresses trees, and high temperatures can contribute to forest fires. We can expect more precipitation, but in a shorter amount of time, less snowpack, meaning that the precipitation that falls will contribute to flooding in our rivers. So more intense rainfall, but will Oregon be less habitable? No, of course not. We have a citizenry that understands the problem, that values sustainability, that understands how to respond to climate change, to reduce emissions, that is active and involved. We are resource rich. We have the ability to adapt. We have the ability to accommodate migrants who will come in, accommodate them with schools and with healthcare, with infrastructure, with housing, with jobs. We have a diversified, resilient economy and a set of livelihoods that can accommodate people who would come. We have abundant sources of renewable energy. Hydropower, solar power, wind power, and most of all, we have a cooperative, democratic form of government that allows us to determine what we want. So the key obstacle then is this issue of sublinear cooperation. That at the group level, it takes us a long time to arrive at decisions. So let's see, in the interest of time, I was going to talk a little bit about what we've known about addressing the issue of climate change. at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and how we've hit obstacle after obstacle, first with Kyoto and then the Paris Agreement. The United States withdrew its support, in the last couple of years. That was the policy of the previous administration. But amazingly, there was never any doubt that the United States would meet its obligations to the Paris Climate Agreement to reduce its emissions. And the reason why that is the cooperation of what we call subnational units, cities, states, companies that decided to think smaller, to think longer term, and to think together to address the problems. And so to sort of bring this all back home and open this up for questions, these are the sorts of things we want to think about in the 22nd Century Survival Project. We know that cooperation is humanity's superpower. It enabled us to come from the Stone Age to the present, but there are problems ahead. The children who are alive today will see the 22nd century and the problems that we'll encounter between now and then. And the only things that are going to make it into that 22nd century are the things that we decide to cooperate on. So what should we carry with us? This is a conversation that we would like to start and that we'd like you to join. And so with that, I'll open this up for questions. Thanks.
Nice work, David.
Yeah. Nice work to all of you. That was a really engaging, informative talk. Okay, I've got some questions. Hopefully y'all can sort of decide among you who will take charge. Can we make enough changes to reduce the risk of climate displacement to refugees? So I guess, like, are there changes we can make that would help climate change enough to reduce the displacement of refugees? And like, how would that work?
David, I don't know if that's me or you. Or
that's sort of in between. So there's an issue here. When we think about refugees, there's a specific, like people who are on the move because of the persecution of somebody. And the issue with climate change is there are people displaced who are forcibly moving, who don't have a choice, don't have agency about the timing of their movement and the place that the location where they might move, but there's not persecution. And so we sometimes think of these people as climate refugees, but and there can be overlap. There can be people who are stressed out by climate change and moving because of persecution. And that's what Jamon's describing. So I don't know if that gets to it.
I think that's exactly what I was going to say too, right? There's this idea of climate refugees, people that are being displaced by climate change, is not formally recognized. So the term refugee is not technically appropriate, but when you're just talking about climate displaced populations, then that's the join the Paris Accord, stay in the Paris Accord, reduce emissions. When people are forced to migrate because their home is uninhabitable anymore, welcome them. Support open borders, support open policies that encourage cooperation and treating your neighbor like one of your own.
This is something, I mean, like Jamon, you hit it right on the head, I think. And this is a message that I think we all are it's important to us. It's true. It's empirically true that migrants are a net positive, that it's good to get migrants. Migration helps us all. It's beneficial in so many ways. Migrants are model citizens. They improve everywhere that they, in general, on average, everywhere they go. And so there are things we can do to advantage from migrants who might come because of climate change here in the Pacific Northwest. And there are things we can do to accommodate them. So we can advantage from it and we can accommodate them. And in fact, those go together. If we do accommodate them, then we can advantage from it instead of create these festering social problems that might emerge through time. So that's important. And thanks for bringing that up, Jamon.
That's a good question.
I've got a couple related to that question as well. Are there organizations to support or resources we can provide locally to help refugees and to provide that welcoming situation here in Oregon?
I'm sure there are. I'm not familiar with state level refugee reception, but I'm sure there are resources. I wish I knew.
I'll say, to answer that question a little bit, the IRCO, the Immigrant Refugee that starts with C organization, is a good Portland area refugee resettlement resource. If anybody's wondering about that.
So if we're thinking about climate change, people who are moving here because of climate change, we know that this is likely to happen. That, you know, this map that Jamon showed of suitability, that the Pacific Northwest is not as unsuitable as the southern United States and as Florida, you know, I pointed out. And so we can expect the current migration networks that already exist to continue and migrants to come. But what happens is we know that the early movers are always the most well off. These are the people who have the means to migrate, that have the resources, they have the social networks that would allow it. They have the ability they have flexible livelihoods that allow them to take advantage of migration. And so the people who are moving now because of climate change, we know anecdotally that the people are already moving here. Instead of moving to the Sierras in California, wow, geez, there's a lot of fire risk. Let's move to the Pacific Northwest. We already know that that's we already know that people from the coastal southern United States are moving here anecdotally, but these are the most well off. And so there's less difficulty accommodating people who are, you know, the early movers. But as time, you know, over time, it's going to become more and more difficult as people are displaced. So sorry, long-winded answer.
Well, this leads right into another question. Like, does the United States have any sort of larger policies or plans for that eventuality of climate refugees and mass movement within the country? So not like external borders, but between states, like from southern states to northern states. Like, do they have a plan for that? No.
My knowledge, no.
So.
There are individual communities that are relocating, and sea level rise is the case in point. There are communities in Alaska and communities in Louisiana that are already undergoing what we call managed retreat, which is movement of community level resettlement in places that are becoming inundated or just unsustainable.
And those are mainly indigenous communities, or Black and brown communities.
Yeah.
I would say that most of it, David, I think you know more about this than I do, but one anecdote that always has stuck with me is city planners in, I think, Chicago have started to plant trees that are native to Georgia. So there's like this recognition that the climate is changing, and don't invest in trees, we're just going to die, or have a difficult go in just a decade or two. Trees live a long time, right? And it's an investment. So there's a recognition, but it's really thorny when you start trying to get into the census and migration within the states and between states. It's not a well managed or well documented thing, except for the census, as far as I know. And I guess you could think of it as a tax record. So I think a lot of it is acknowledged ad hoc, but there's not like an internal climate displacement commission right now, but that would be amazing. Maybe John Kerry will get into that as the climate envoy.
But there is an emerging climate services sector in the private sector. So there are a few tech startups offering sort of climate forecast services to cities like Chicago, telling them recommending which trees to plant, working with forestry companies here in Oregon, telling them which species of trees to plant, so that they can harvest them in 10, 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so this is happening, right? We've seen it in the insurance industry, now in these climate services sectors, in defense and security. Everyone's acknowledging climate change as an issue. And now we're seeing institutions taking steps to deal with it.
Okay, next question. Are there, in talking about like the warehousing of refugees, is there any like movement or reason for those countries to be motivated to unwarehouse them at all, or just staying static?
Oh yeah, all those reasons David mentioned. There's it's a labor force that wants to work, and it's a force that wants to be engaged and have livelihoods and have wage-seeking employment and contribute back. So as David mentioned, there study after study in refugee hosting regions, you see this positive socioeconomic benefit, and you see it in many different ways, many different measures of socioeconomic benefits, which is a pretty, blunt measurement. Like, does it improve our GDP? Right? It's just answering that question, and it does. So there's a lot of incentive to doing it. Yes.
I guess, like, are the country's leadership recognizing that? Like, have you seen a shift in policy towards unwarehousing, like, as a result of all this?
No.
Data?
No, it's a really difficult, stagnant issue that that partly has to do with sort of bottom-up, top-down relationships within refugee hosting regions, the allocation of land for refugee communities, the recognition of ethnic and linguistic and cultural differences. It's amazing that broadly that the UNHCR is so effective at saving lives and allowing people support after fleeing, things like genocide, large-scale civil war for decades. But it's a very difficult problem when it's like this pacification of the local host regions to allow these people to come in who may have different tensions, who may be seeing themselves as security threats because they're fleeing a conflict zone. Even though there's no evidence that refugees are, any more conflict prone than local populations. In fact, they're much less so. So there's incentive to do it, but it's just, it's tough to do, right? To get that policy enacted and to have local buy-in, it's very difficult. Land good land is difficult to come by. There's tensions, and there's just a simplistic solution to it, which is just like partition them off, marginalize, keep them in the encampments, and sort of an out of sight, out of mind frame of mind.
And I think that's true in the United States, in Europe, in industrialized countries too. The last few years we've seen a policy shift. Last year there were no refugees accepted, right? Is that right, Jamon?
I don't know if it was no, but it was the lowest ever in recent years.
And so, on the southern border, Central American migrants, it's been virtually impossible to claim asylum and register as a refugee, even though conditions there are, it's like I said, because of violence, it's uninhabitable. You can't go back. And there's been a whole bunch of reporting on this, and for those of you who are interested, I mean, New York Times has done a bunch of work on this, and there's a great episode that on This American Life that covers some of the what's happening, the sort of concentration of refugees on the southern border inside of Mexico, in basically in encampments that are similar. Like as Jamon was describing, these are meant to be temporary, but they become protracted over time as refugees are settled in these places and their needs are met there. What is meant to be a camp becomes, decades old, and we're going to see that happen there.
Yeah. Quick reminder to everyone watching, please put any questions you have in that chat box, and then I can ask them to our speakers. Another question, and this is, I think we're getting a lot of refugee-based questions, I think, because James, you just spoke first, so it was too long ago.
Instead, I'm out of date already. It's fine.
And there's a sort of a couple questions that'll sort of form together a little bit around healthcare in these refugee camps during this pandemic, and if you know sort of what the effect of the pandemic has been. And one of the questions was like, can we vaccinate refugees in these camps, or like how is that supported?
I can comment a little bit. I don't know that level of detail at the vaccination sort of protocol level. I do know that the effects of COVID have been very detrimental on refugee hosting populations, because even in, of course, they're more susceptible to the transmission within camps to begin with, because there's less access in general to healthcare and personal protective equipment. But there's also been some really unfortunate additional restrictions on refugee movements because of that concern of you could think of it pessimistically as refugees transmitting the virus to host communities, or optimistically or favorably as the already vulnerable population having exposure to outside potential for transmission. But the result is the same, which is that refugee camps have been re-securitized, even in countries like Uganda that have had a very liberal refugee policy. They've been shut down, clamped down again because of COVID. So yeah, it's very detrimental. They're much broader though. There's real challenges over documenting epidemiological and other kind of health concerns in refugee camps, because we don't have baseline information about these settlements like we do in other areas. They're not part of the census almost ever. We have out-of-date and non-public population data. Refugee camps often don't appear in maps. We don't have the same kind of just data that's available to public health officials that work with refugees. So there's just some various hurdles to even understanding how they're being affected as well.
I've got a couple of cooperation-based questions.
James, this is for you.
Okay.
It's your time to shine. Okay, I'm gonna ask them both because they're fairly similar, but they're worded different. So, one is, are there forms of cooperation that don't yet exist that we will need in order to make it to the 22nd century? And then this other question that is pretty similar is like, are there things we can do to improve cooperation at the societal level that will help us get past the coming filters that block our way to a better future?
Yeah, cool. I'll start with the last one. So, I mean, to me, the biggest threat to our ability to to cooperate with one another, and as we discussed, like that's the key to getting through the great filters in front of us. The biggest threat is this degradation of our information channels, like through social media, and you know, this is not something new. We've seen this happen. There's a lot of people have talked about this in the last year, in the last few years, and how we've been polarized, how we are stuck in our own echo chambers, how misinformation and disinformation can spread far more quickly and more broadly in our now quite large social networks than truth. And sometimes we call it, we're living in a post-truth world. It doesn't matter what the truth is. And that's the biggest threat to our ability to cooperate. So an improvement would be to find a way to mute this thing that's happening to us and our interaction with information and all this information out there. I think a lot about Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, and he has a saying, Facebook has a saying, we just want to connect people, and they sort of relate that connection with empathy. And if we can just improve the empathy we have for one another, everything will be okay. But it didn't work. Their platform has not worked. It's a failure in that respect. They've connected us in the wrong way. Their connections, this overdrive of connectivity is not creating empathy. It's creating the opposite. It's creating polarization. So that's a sort of a technological innovation that has failed in this respect. But that's not to say there aren't future Facebooks or future Twitters or whatever that improve our ability to empathize with other people. And I think that's a key step that needs to happen. I mean, other than that, one extreme would be let's shut down our social networks. Like we're too distributed now. our social networks 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago were much smaller, much more local, but much more genuine in a way. In both, it's one-on-one interactions, but also the genuine in terms of the information that we've been gathering. And so, in that sense, it's much more based in fact and truth.
So,
David, did you want to say something?
A concrete example, I work on climate change issues, and I've watched for 20 years as climate denialism has persisted in spite of incredibly good climate science done by tens of thousands of researchers all over the planet, really great improvements in our sophistication of climate models and much greater resolution and blah, 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 all the things we could praise about climate science. In spite of it, we see this persistence. In 2015, the first time I ever taught a class on the human dimensions of climate change, I declared so wrongly that climate denialism is dead. It's in its death throes. It's over. And here we are. It's worse than ever. And it's this precisely what James is saying, that it's misinformation. It's simply our ability to say a thing and by virtue of saying it, it becomes true. How do we that it undermines our ability to do the Paris Climate Agreement.
Yeah, and so the first question about whether there are new forms of cooperation, I think the only thing that's relatively new would be the scale of cooperation that's required. So I think we're all used to cooperating. I cooperate with my wife sometimes over how we raise our children. Jamon, David and we cooperate with our colleagues at the university to teach. We cooperate as a state in terms of how we operate. We cooperate with each other as a nation. And so there's this sort of scale in terms of the number of people that we interact with or are connected to in terms of how we cooperate. And what's interesting, like the evolutionary biologists always think of cooperation in terms of competition. Other species cooperate too, not just us. And all of us initially we cooperated with one another to win at competition at high levels of organization. So by that, I mean at group levels. So we formed nations so that we could win at wars. The challenge for us now is there's no one left to fight. We need to figure out how to cooperate at a global scale without there being sort of a competitive reason to do so. And that would be a competitive reason to do so. I guess the real reason now is to survive. We have to do this or else we won't survive. But that would be the switch, I guess. That would be what the new form of cooperation. Instead of cooperating to compete, we're cooperating to survive.
And perhaps also cooperating with outcomes that will not make themselves apparent for millennia, right? Like in long term, it's not there's a zero sum, like if winner take all scenario, which is the opposite of cooperation. And then there's this, I think, impossible, the only, example that I can think of it even transcends cooperation, but it's just basic ecology, this sort of basic relationships between living organisms on Earth as they engage with each other and engage with the climate around them. There's very little, much less predation in the natural world compared to cooperation between species. Think of any insect you can think of, right? With the exception of the murder hornets, you're going to see a lot of cooperation. And that sort of one thing that I think is so exciting to talk with David and James about these kind of topics is because we often end up we talk about systems thinking. I think whether we call it this way or not, I think we often talk about and identify sort of ecology-based solutions, which deal with networks and relationships. And James's presentation at the beginning showed some of the risks to that connection. And I think that, we're very interested in trying to find pathways for sustainable solutions that take on some of those risks, but also offer something in return that can't be achieved otherwise.
Speaking of great filters or filters that are blocking our way to a better future, what other great filters are likely to exist in this millennia?
In this millennia, for a long time. Well,
This century.
If we can get over, well, look, one of them, one famous one is what Elon Musk is worried about, right? Which is that an asteroid is going to hit our planet, a planet killer asteroid, and that's a great filter. And so going interstellar is the only, or interplanetary is the only solution there, and that is a huge technological challenge. So you can think of that as a great filter. Not many civilizations out there in the universe, us included, are perhaps going to be able to breach that filter and get interplanetary, so that we minimize our risk of death by planet killer asteroid or meteor. AI, general AI. There's a lot of talk, discussion about this. It is, in some sense, inevitable that it's going to happen, but it's still off the table, off the cards as to what is the ultimate end to general AI. There's a great a philosopher at Oxford University, Nick Bostrom, actually, who has written a very famous essay on all the ways in which we can die as a civilization. It lists out all the forms of, it's existential risk or existential threats. These are the things that will end us as a civilization. And it includes like planet killer asteroids, it includes general artificial intelligence, other diseases, pandemics, climate change. Isn't, David, your favorite one is the nanobot goo? Do you want to mention that one?
You can imagine a self-replicating molecule or a kind of a nanobot that just acquires other elements and turns itself into and creates more copies of itself from any material it touches. And once one of those is created, it can exponentially overtake a planet. We could be, it only needs to be invented once to destroy a planet.
This is John Carpenter's The Thing, the self-replicating thing.
So much to be fearful of. My goodness.
Yeah.
And then fear is I was going to say this in the last one. There is so much to be afraid of, but I think like fear is the primary obstacle to cooperation, especially when we fear each other. When we think about there's a lot we could say here, but I think this is, in order to cooperate, you need to trust each other. Trust that that your interlocutor or your partner is decent, and I think one of the existential dangers, I think, is fearing that person is not, and then and what we've seen is these. That can go bad in a lot of different ways, as Jamon has pointed out. And so, it seems silly, but values such as fear and trust, I think, are existential risks. We ought to think about that really seriously.
So another cooperating question. What groups and or individuals do y'all think are currently missing and necessary to be at the table for what we're talking about cooperating for this 22nd century?
I can't answer. I've got a bunch of children attacking me. Excuse me.
The question is, what groups need to be...
Like individuals or groups do you think are missing and that should be at the table for like this sort of these levels of cooperation to get us to the 22nd century?
I would just say, children. I've been really inspired by the Sunshine Movement and other groups related to that are trying to take actionable climate change action, or make actionable climate change suggestions, rather. I think that, if you, going back to what David was saying, with fear as the killer of cooperation, I think children dealing with, talking with people in great positions of power are more fearless than any adult that I've ever seen. It's also their future. So, inevitably, we have this stagnation of leadership and creative thought, where this assumption that experience yields foresight is not true in most cases, especially when you're talking about conditions that are far outside the envelope of what anyone can imagine. I'd be shocked if there were octogenarians who were like climate doomers, but you can find lots of teenagers, and there's a lot of hype around this right now, but there are sizable, seemingly sizable subpopulations of teenagers and early 20s, people in their early 20s who are effectively unwillingly accepting of climate catastrophe. That demographic, that the things that have been accepted and rationalized, and perhaps even I don't know, I guess it is just like a deep acceptance of the worst outcome. You need people like that at the table who are really grappling with like worst case scenarios in their brain personally, and have already moved past them and made decisions in their own life. So I think that would be a very valuable group to have, young people.
Yeah, my students are amazing. I think I teach a 100 level course. It's 18, 19-year-old first year, second year college students, and they're amazing on this stuff. And it gives me a lot of hope that they really see with clarity the challenge that's ahead of them, and that previous generations have, the problem that the previous generations have created is to them to fix. And there's a lot of clarity and a lot of determination. I think courage. Like one of the things that I hear them saying is kind of like, get out of my way. This is my country. I want to lead it. And I really applaud that. I think it's amazing. It is the other generations have let them down, and it is their country, and they do need the opportunity to fix the problems. And so that's young people.
Yeah.
Let's see. Do y'all know if there's any movement towards making policy to limit disinformation / thoughts on Section 230?
Well, I mean, the ball's in the big tech companies' court in many ways. Well, it's not that's not entirely true, right? It's they have a choice. They don't need to have an ad-driven business model. That's a choice. And the ad-driven business model is a lot behind, a lot of the issues with social media. How social disinformation, misinformation flows through the social media. You've seen little baby efforts to get going, like little, automatic fact checking, and that's helpful. That's a thing, and artificial intelligence plays a role there. It can, in real time, judge whether something's, the truthiness of something. But the ball is also in the court of the politicians, and whether we can allow such platforms to proliferate misinformation or disinformation. There's a lot of, it's a very big topic because, of course, I interact with some folks in the Department of Defense as well, and those folks, they know that this is happening. And if you followed or watched the films about Cambridge Analytica, it's actually weaponized, it's used, and so there's an incentive to keep it the way it is, and that's an issue too. But ultimately, I actually think the fact that we are in a competitive marketplace means that, and that we're seeing the limits to the utility of the current social media platforms because of the misinformation, disinformation. This might naturally lead to new platforms that will outcompete the present ones that are better, that do limit the spread of misinformation, disinformation.
There are a ton more questions, but we only have time for probably one more before we have to wrap it up. So for folks at home, if I didn't get a chance to ask your question during this time, we are going to send all your questions along to the speakers, and we'll put their answers into, I think, the comments on the live feed, so you can come back and check in So you're not being left behind if you haven't seen your question answered. But yeah, there's a lot of interest in all of this, and it's just so complex. There's so many different sort of aspects that people are curious about. But for the last question, I'll grab this one that's a little bit more broad, and hopefully we can end on we'll see if it's a positive or no or not. So from all of y'all's background and experience with these complex systems, do you expect or have you seen evidence of new strategies or approaches to policymaking that addresses the sublinear nature of it all? Or do you see like the social dynamics sort of stopping that from happening?
I mean, you cut out a little bit, but I heard that there's the sublinear policy issue, the fact that policies are updated way too slowly, and that actually the problems are coming at us faster and faster and hitting us harder and harder. And this is a problem. I mean, in a really one geeky thing that I know of, we are leaning on AI more and more, and there are sort of hybrid human AI teams that are popping up all over the place, right? So everything from like coders who want to develop some code, like a new website or something, you can actually get AI to generate a lot of that code, and so the team can work much more quickly. Now, in terms of policy and policymakers, there's a huge amount of time, a huge amount of effort goes into just reviewing and understanding what has been documented so far. And actually, AI human hybrid team, the AI can serve that human team the information, find the information, relevant information, way more quickly. And that might speed up the process of policy reform. We'll never reach, we would never want, and we will never reach the point of making the decisions, but an augmentation of human decision making by like, oh, this is the AI is helping me, find the right information is useful.
I've got a thought here on this, on what induces kind of a breakthrough on the sublinear policy stuff. We can think of a couple of examples of policy where we have achieved great things, like landing on the moon, like rescuing the miners from the Chilean mine collapse that required incredible amounts of coordination, cooperation, investment in technology, radical solutions, kind of ingenuity applied in a very specific way. And so the common denominator in some of we could list more of these, and part of the rationale for the 22nd Century Survival Project is that what's common is survival. And in the case of the space race, it was the survival of the American system against the Soviet system. And in the case of the Chilean miners, it was the survival of these people and their, these men who were breadwinners and family, part of a family that needed to go on. They needed to survive. And so if we consider this question of survival as a motivating driver for cooperation, that itself could be a model to follow.
I mean, I keep coming back to the disinformation issue, because one unfortunate process that we go through is when there's a catastrophe, we react. So we're poor at being proactive because we discount the future, and all that problem is very far away from me. But when it hits us, and if we're able to accept it for what it is, and that's the issue with misinformation, if we don't believe that we're getting hit, we don't believe the cause of it, that's a problem. But if we manage to understand the problem and accept what it is and who's causing that problem, then often we are spurred into action quite effectively. And this is why it's so hard projecting out into the future how things are going to change. It's relatively easy to do that for the physics and the chemistry of the Earth. It's very hard to know how we're going to react. If the business as usual scenario pans out, we're going to get hit really hard. And in a way that might end up serving us. We might react to it quite strongly. So that's but it does depend upon whether we believe what's going on is happening, and that's the misinformation issue.
And if I'll just say one more thing, just following on James's example of the ozone hole detection and the ban of chlorofluorocarbons, that was possible because there was an alternative. there was some other system in place that allowed the abandonment of one approach and the introduction of another at a slightly higher cost. And that's the crux of it now, is that we don't have this massive infrastructure to just replace gasoline and diesel engines in the United States. We don't have the resources to do that in a systematic way. So even though you may have all the information you need, we still have this gap from just like, okay, you stop route path A, path B isn't viable for a whole bunch of reasons. So we just stayed on path A. I think that's perhaps one of the most intractable aspects with environmental policy is just the lack of viable alternatives at scale. It's a scale issue, maybe.
Thank you all so much for all of your wonderful input and thoughtfulness. I'm going to send along the rest of these questions to you, and hopefully we'll get some more answers. But it's always a pleasure having y'all on the program. For folks at home, we are out of time. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's event. And if you would like to watch the video again or share it with your friends, please check out the video section on OMSI's Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates on future events and inspiring content from OMSI in the good way of social media. And I know we mentioned it at the beginning, but please consider supporting Science Pub and making a donation via the Facebook donate button, or you can visit omsi.edu/donate. And please join us in 2 weeks on December 15th for a lecture about lemurs with Dr. Natalie Vasey, who's a professor from Portland State University. So in this talk, she's going to talk about the astonishing adaptive diversity of our close relatives, the primates of Madagascar. She illustrates how the social organizations, ecological adaptations, and reproductive strategies of some species allow short-term survival in the face of natural disturbance and anthropogenic habitat degradation. So cool. Yeah, it's all related.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rebecca, and thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone at home, and once again, thanks to the speakers, thanks to our partner Celestream for making tonight happen, and thank you all of you at home for joining in and hanging out with us tonight. So have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.